It is December the 22nd. I'm with my newly met friend, Gary Gordon. Gary, could you tell us your full name?
Gary Lee Gordon.
And Gary, when and where were you born?
I was born in Lubbock, Texas, July the 6th, 1948.
And what was your childhood like growing up in Texas?
I think it was pretty much a standard post World War II childhood. My parents met when my father came home from World War II. He was a U.S. Army. He was pretty much in the North or in the Pacific area, wounded at Luzon Islands, not severely or anything, but came home and, like many of the men back then, saw the first woman he came across and they got married. And shortly thereafter, I came into existence and, you know, parents had bought a house, taking advantage of some of the GI Bill issues there, and father had gotten a job and just regular little kid, rugrat running around.
Did your dad ever talk about his time in World War II ever?
Hardly ever. Um, Looking back at that time period, knowing what I know now, the only time I ever really heard him talk any at all about it was when quite often a couple of my uncles that I had that, you know, um, he had two brothers that were also in World War II, and family would get together on a typical West Texas Lubbock party night and be drinking a little bit. And the more they drank, the more they talked and things of that nature. But I was running around with my cousins, so I didn't pay a lot of attention at that time. I did get in trouble. My brother and I had a brother who's about 18 months younger than myself. I was firstborn, and we had kind of snooping around one day. We found his Purple Heart that was in the chest of drawers, and there's a Japanese flag. So we got playing around, played war, ran up the Japanese flag in the front yard, and my mother started getting phone calls. Pretty sensitive back then. But in terms of just growing up, just a little kid getting in trouble, and interesting little, I started grade school, and actually I was detained in the first grade because of a speech impediment. And I like to tell people, here I spent an extra year in grade school learning how to talk, and the radio, and the Marine Corps makes a radio operator out of me. Go figure.
No kidding. It's kind of funny how that turns around for you later in life.
It did. It's significant in the sense that I don't remember what the speech impediment name was, but I have a tendency to try to talk as fast as the brain was processing speech. So you drop syllables, ram two words together, and people would say, huh? So basically, I was just kind of taught to be a little more aware of my speech and be a little bit more clear in my enunciation and things of that nature, which ironically turned out to be very convenient being a radio operator in Vietnam. Proverbial shit could hit the fan, and I was pretty calm, cool, and collected, and people could understand what I was saying because I already had a little bit of brain exercise there for slowing down.
Well, and a lot of people, not to jump ahead, but you bring up an excellent point, but a lot of people don't understand the importance of an RTO, especially a calm and cool, collected RTO in the midst of a firefight or even a major operation in a battle where you have to relay information that can be understood to whoever the receiving party is. That could mean the difference in life or death.
It was a pretty responsible job, and all those elements are certainly there. And being a school trained radio operator, I had advantages there. As you well know, individuals replacing individuals. They didn't always have a school trained radio operator. And lower down, you went in the battalion, just they'd hand somebody a Pick 25 radio and say, you're the radio operator. So a lot of my time being a school trained radio operator would be that would work sometimes with the other guys that were company level or something, going through some of the do's and don'ts of what to do on the radio and whatnot, especially, radio security, things of that nature.
Absolutely. Well, and I know whenever we get to your time in country, that'll be a fantastic talking point of you becoming a teacher in a sense and teaching those in country the property or the protocols of that nature. But leading up to before you joined the Marine Corps, of course, I know you played football in high school and that definitely aided, but had you heard about Vietnam at all while you were playing football or in those early high school years?
You know, um, Vietnam basically for American involvement troop wise was around 1965. So at that time period, I was just going into high school. In junior high school, uh, I had played football and I ran track. I was a 3/4 miler in junior high school. So when I got to high school as a freshman, I didn't stay with football or track. I thought going into a higher level of education there wouldn't be quite as competitive. And plus, going into high school, whole new experience. And basically, the end of the first year, my freshman year, we got a new head coach that came in, did a recruiting effort, and got me all fired up. So I went ahead and signed back up for football and finished out high school football. And of course, track wise, I went on to run the mile. I was a miler.
And an impressive mile time from what I read too.
I'm sorry.
And a very impressive mile time from what I read too.
Anything below sub 4:30 in high school wasn't bad. I'm sure I could have got a track scholarship when I graduated, some small college somewhere, but um, a lot of people don't realize what you have to do to be a competitive miler as far as the workouts. You're doing a lot of running just to kind of get your body up to the point of being able to push itself more and more. All of that intimately helpful in boot camp.
Absolutely. I mean, especially with the mentality that you have to get in your running to pace yourself, but also to the mentality and the workout that you have to go through. By the time you went into the Marine Corps, I'm sure the running was just a breeze.
It was, and I feel so sorry for the guys that typical morning, in boot camp would be that you'd get up in the morning, you run down and take a quick constitutional, and then head back, do some calisthenics, and then go out on a 3 mile jog. And that's before breakfast. So of course I was feeling good, and later on it came in handy too because I could, finish 3 mile president fitness test type thing was something later on that you had to do about once every 3 months. And I wasn't well liked because I always finished first in that. And if you finish first, you got an extra leave day. So people was hoping I'd break a leg, but what I would do is I'd finish and then run back out to the last guy and run back in with him. So I got brownie points for that. So
Well, and if you think into the Marine Corps ethos, that actually factors in well to what the Marine Corps trains you to do of not leaving anyone behind, making sure that you're bringing them in.
it did. And for me at that point, it was just common sense kind of a thing. And, I felt okay. And it just, I think without realizing it, I was making a little notation to drill instructors and people like that. So I had a very benign boot camp, pretty much left me alone.
Well, and while you're in boot camp too, going through that process, I know you mentioned in the writing you shared with me that your thought process was that by the time you finished boot camp and finished perhaps ITR, that the worst part of the war would be over. And I find that is one of the most poignant statements I've read.
Yes, that was, I make a reference several different times in my writing about how what I call common sense logic and Marine Corps logic didn't always match up there. So I was the one that always had to make the adaptations, and but I knew that there was a element of risk involved, and in boot camp, I think I made reference to when you determine at the very end of boot camp what your military job is going to be, and getting that little cold message from my drill instructor who had been to Vietnam and talked about the average life expectancy in a combat situation for a ready operator was 7 seconds. Um, in Vietnam, I got to experience the reality of why that was. We were always ready operator, first target in an ambush type situation, um, command officer type person, always second target. And since we were usually so close together, if we could knock out both of us, I'm sure they got points.
Well, and with that too, as you got to the end of boot camp, but not to jump ahead, but even during your time in boot camp, did you have an idea of what you wanted to do within the Marine Corps for the duration you were going to be in?
I actually had hoped once I discovered I was going to be a radio operator, I knew I was going to be going to radio school, and I really wanted to do the best job I could there. I thought a backdoor way out for me would be to, finish high in the class, and then they might consider keeping me to allow me to do some training. So I did end up fifth in the class, accomplished that part of it. But since they needed radio operators in Vietnam a lot more than they needed instructors, because they had people coming home from Vietnam that already had the war experience plus the year's worth of radio. So that didn't work out either. And basically, about 5 months after I had started boot camp, I was on my way to Okinawa there. A lot of trepidation because, I mentioned there, especially on the first day, that when you arrive in Vietnam is where you got your orders to what units you're going to be with and things of that nature. But I kind of jump ahead. So
Well, and taking it a step back to your boot camp experience, I understand that you had some unusual events during your time in boot camp that are quite comical.
yeah, I guess you'd call it two major ones, and you probably talking about those two. The one in the rifle range,
Yes, sir, that's one of them.
yeah. The one prior to that was a little tap on the shoulder kind of a thing, during mail call one day shortly after got there. You could probably have measured my heart rate from about 10 feet away from me. Bang, 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 bang. I'd done such a wonderful job of keeping a low profile that it was kind of a shock to me.
Well, and with keeping that low profile, and of course the shock and in that sense. I mean, how do you feel in that moment when you think that you've royally, that shit is about to hit the fan and your world is going to be turned upside down?
Are we talking about the incident of being called down to see the commanding officer?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was in kind of a mental fog. We didn't even know how to really march well at that point. So that's, the spare drill instructor that's always kind of, they tag team who's doing what at the time, but he herded the three of us down to report to the colonel there. And, all that time I'm trying to, figure out why am I coming in to see the man? Because we'd already learned our rank structure and things of that nature and stuff. And when he notified us that we'd scored well enough on our testing, or high enough to be considered for officers candidate school in Quantico, Virginia, I think I made note of the other two guys just immediately, just, jumping for joy type thing. My little brain's going da 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 da, and I'm saying, processing what I thought I heard, knowing what I thought I heard, and I guess I don't know. There's so many thoughts going through my head. The first thing I did was try to clarify by asking if I'd heard correctly that I had the option to go. And of course, when I was informed that I did, I said that I'd choose to remain enlisted. That's where it got a little comical because the reaction on this colonel's face, I mean, literally his jaw dropped. I don't think he could imagine anybody not wanting to be a Marine Corps officer. And I love, and I can remember it almost today, off to my right, catching the glimpse of the drill instructor there. That as soon as coming out of my mouth when I said I chose to remain enlisted, he got this little smile, of a smirk of a smile on his face. And I think in my writing, I say that they really pretty much left me alone. And I don't know if it's because they respected the fact that I chose to remain enlisted, or that they were afraid that they'd do something, I'd get upset and go to officers candidate school and then come looking for them. But we just walked on back. I did, well, we all three of us did, and they were packed and out of there in 15 minutes, and nobody said anything to me about it afterwards. No conversations, no anything. Several of the guys had asked me, obviously, like, what was that all about and everything. I'm saying, even then I was still in such a state of shock that it was just kind of like, well, gave him a Reader's Digest condensed version of what took place. And the one at the rifle range, to this day, I have no idea why I broke my own protocol there. I think it was just a build up and a build up and a build up, and when our very disappointed drill instructor made a comment about who didn't understand what was going on, get out of his shower, I just had that compulsion to stand there and didn't have anything I was going to say at the point. Just he said, who I took him literally that if he didn't understand what was going on, get out. I understood what was going on, so I stayed in. And obviously commented that when I had responded that I knew what was going on. And he very politely asked me to leave his shower. I was expecting to, get kicked in the butt or, cold cocked from behind or something there, and never said anything, never did anything. I bet he had fun with the other drill instructor saying, one of those, you wouldn't believe what Gordon did today. But yeah, I thought that was worth writing about.
Well, and it's interesting. Some of the Marines that I've talked to over the past couple of years ended up being DIs at some point, and oftentimes when I would engage with them, they would tell me that after certain days they go back and they're talking with other instructors, and it's the humorous stuff of the dumb shit or the funny shit that has happened throughout the day, and they laugh about it then.
Well, and there's a lot of that that goes on because, I mean, here these poor guys are herding, ducks, trying to go from point A to point B in a very brief period of time. And there's a lot of little screw ups there and whatnot. And some of it to be expected, but some of it just, you know, it was always an exciting day when we went to learn how to put on our gas mask and expel the gas out of the mask and then take the gas mask off and sing the Marine Corps hymn and all that tear gas. Some interesting reactions there and everything, but it does build character.
Well, and as this character is being built, and I know the process of Marine Corps boot camp is to break down the individual and to build you up as a Marine, to understand that you are part of a bigger team and that each role is part of a larger team effort at the fire team, squad, and on up to the regimental or division level.
You got that correctly.
And from your perspective, as you navigate this Marine Corps way of life and you get this Marine Corps mindset, I know that after you completed rifle qualification, you were sent back down to San Diego, and you mentioned that there was some anxiety building waiting for your MOS because in many ways that determined your fate.
Correct. And obviously, most of the Marines were going into infantry training. Well, you probably know that every Marine, no matter MOS, goes through infantry training after boot camp. But after that is when you either go to your schools or you get assigned to an infantry battalion and continue more specialized infantry training. So, that's a pretty nervous moment there to find out, what your military job's going to be and that sort of thing. And, again, there's some humorous points there when I got to Vietnam because that was very anxiety provoking point there. As a radio operator, I knew I could end up anywhere. And by then, I'd heard enough stories to know there's some places that is better to be than others. And actually, as a school trained radio operator, there's more of an investment in me. So I had a little bit better options than a lot of guys that ended up as radio operators. Um, we can talk about that later when we kind of get to that point.
Well, and thinking as you get your MOS, and of course you've got that moment with your drill instructor who just flat out tells you the reality of the role that you're going to get involved into. Did your perspective and did your opinion change, and possibly your mindset change of your future fate in the Marine Corps?
No, very honestly, it didn't. For one, I knew I was just starting the very beginning of a 4 year experience. I was fairly certain at that point that I was going to be going to Vietnam. I was very focused on learning as much as I could, as best I could, because I knew that there was going to be some importance of tying that together in survival. And I think I was really in a kind of almost a day to day, week to week mentality. Um, I had already discovered all kinds of things could pop up and change things and whatnot. And I tried not to give that a lot of thought. I didn't lay in the rack at night, not going to sleep because worrying about X, Y, or Z of an unknown future. So I was really in kind of a robotic kind of get to the next day and go from there.
Well, and in many ways too, Marine Corps doctrine and going through boot camp kind of instills this mindset to worry or think about only what you can control. That is your mission. Don't think about outside factors. Don't think about anything else. You control what you can, and that's all you can do.
That's very much what it is, and that's demonstrated in many different ways in your training and whatnot. I think that I had just the natural kind of personality and mindset to be able to do that. Then again, my boot camp experience was really not as traumatic as I think it was for many of the other guys, and especially the ones that weren't into the physical condition. Um, almost, I mean, out of my whole platoon of 90 some odd guys, I was probably the most physically prepared person there. So my perspective is a lot different than the 10 or 12 guys that came in overweight and had to put up with the additional training and the diet in the mess hall and things of that nature. One thing I was very amazed about was that, and I addressed this when I came home on my first leave, right after boot camp and before ITR. I had spent almost the last 4 years of my life trying to gain weight for football. Being a miler, it's hard to gain weight. So I was weighing 150 pounds going into boot camp. When I got out of boot camp, I weighed 170. And I was wearing, when I got home on leave, I was wearing the same clothes that I was wearing when I was in high school at 150.
Wow.
So when they use that term solid weight gain, that's kind of what boot camp did to me, you know. Added muscle and it was mean and lean.
Well, as your boot camp career comes to a close, you have this mean and lean mentality, but you also have this mean and lean fit. And that's when graduation happens. You've reached that crescendo of the point of boot camp to where you are now going to have the parade. So, what was graduation day like for you?
It was very well, very much waited for. Uh, it was nervous because everybody's going to be marching in the final parade type situation there, and in review of all the commanding military people and the families and things like that. So there's this big, don't let me screw up, don't let me screw up kind of a concern. I didn't have any family or anybody there for graduation. So the thing that it was just kind of a stand out on the tarmac there and stand in formation, let everybody do their speeches. And then when they dismissed us, that was probably the moment that all of a sudden it was like, it's over. You know, I made it. Um, I'm out of boot camp. And it was a little bit, I'd already been thinking about, the infantry training. I was looking forward to that. I thought that would be better. Anything would have been better than boot camp, but getting to go out and learn about infantry tactics and things of that nature, I was looking forward to. Had a tease on some of that in boot camp, like how to throw a hand grenade. That's a rush. But the timing was that I was getting out or finishing boot camp right there close to Christmas. So we actually got boot camp leave to go home if you wanted to, and then come back in a couple of weeks, and we were going to be starting at ITR. And I think I write a little bit about, like when I did go home and leave there during that time, just right after boot camp, it was just kind of an awkward time. Um, just seemed like in a very short period of time, other my friends and everybody had kind of moved on, and um, a lot of my friends had been the people involved in the sports and things of that nature. And of course, that was the time of year that they were pretty active themselves. and I was already beginning to feel like a fish out of water. You know, the Marine Corps stamp had already been placed, and by then too, the protests back in America about the war and things of that nature. I had not heard any news during my whole time in boot camp. You know, we're not like the Army where we got a TV in the barracks and candy machines. So pretty isolated for that period of time, and then getting back and getting caught up, see how much things had changed from the time that I went in and what I was aware of to, things being pretty bad. That's when I first started hearing about some of the, not Khe Sanh by name, but that things were not looking so good. That was during the big Tet offensive, came shortly after that. So, that was all in the news and whatnot. So I had this mixture of feelings of very thankful to have boot camp behind me, looking forward to ITR, but also seeing the big cloud on the horizon, that was what I was moving into. So mixed feelings going on there.
Well, and two, while you're going through boot camp and starting ITR, of course, in late 67, by that point, the NVA was quite active in the I Corps area in the summer of 1967, 67 and 0. Operation Union 1, 2, Operation Swift, and then you've got Operation, there was another one in the latter part of the year in November, I know, that the 1st Marine Division was quite active in. And
Mhm.
we're talking some of the fiercest fighting of the war up until that point, and then Tet kicking off in January 1968.
Exactly. And obviously, I didn't know what unit I was going to be in at that time, but a lot of that was even in the news. Years after I got out, after I started working for the Veterans Administration, I went to a symposium in Salado, Texas, of all places, a little kind of halfway between here and um, Dallas area. The symposium was titled, it was a lot of the people that were broadcast people at that time. And it was titled Vietnam, the First Televised War. And it had, you know, having been through what was being televised and seeing these reporters and the media people doing their presentations and stuff. And a lot of them had very much that, I don't want to call it anti-American. I'm sure they were very disappointed in terms of, the use of military forces in Vietnam based on what they were seeing and learning. There's always a big question about, the original idea of the domino theory and stopping communism from taking over and supporting the French there and let them be the ones to do the fighting. Should sound familiar. But getting the politicians involved in warfare at that level and being televised back to the civilian population is not a good mix.
Well, and you can even take some of that World War II. I know that the Battle of Tarawa is well known in Marine Corps history and by military historians.
Yeah,
Yet the Battle of Tarawa was quite televised, and a lot of that footage did show dead Marines. And when it was
yeah.
shown back in the United States, even during World War II, the public reacted horribly to it, to seeing the images and the video stills of the bodies of
Mhm.
Marines. And I
Yeah,
know that a direct order was issued by that point to not show American casualties in any news media, of course,
yeah.
until after the war. And it's a lesson that could have been avoided in Vietnam
Mhm.
where the public, and as you know this, Gary, you were there, the public isn't ready to see those sights of what war brings out because they're not trained for it.
That's, I mean, that's it in a nutshell, kind of thing. And and it's that was a big component of my thinking when I started putting together my own way of presenting post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's why I came up with the kind of the idea about the blinders, the civilians, let's say, in the analogy that we're talking about now, and the combatants who have kind of, they don't have the blinders on anymore. They see more. That doesn't mean it wasn't there for the civilians to see, but with a televised war, et cetera, that creates a difference. And I kind of jokingly say that once you've been outside of the blinders, out and you see what reality is like, it's like virginity. You don't go back, you
Well,
know?
that's an excellent analogy. And to cater to that too, and to add to this discussion, if you think about the media involvement in Vietnam, how many of the major news agencies were telling stories that weren't related to American deaths and combat and how the casualties were continuing to rise? What about the good stories that actually did come out of Vietnam? Some of the programs that were done to rehabilitate Vietnamese citizens that the
Yeah,
Marine Corps definitely worked with, were those being reported back in country or back in the world, I should say?
yeah. And there was a lot of that. The winning hearts and minds theme kind of thing. Personally, I think that our involvement, the the good thing about American involvement in Vietnam, you can look at and see Vietnam today, and it came out of that. Uh, they were losing so much of their younger population. The old guys, have died off, but the young guys there, a lot of them were the 14, 15-year-old kids that witnessed capitalism and free enterprise, and they liked it, you know. Um, there's that period right after South Vietnam fell, the re-education process that was going on, and everything, but even that early American involvement, I think, survived all of that to be what it is today. Um, so,
Well, I think that we're going to get along just fine when we do some further interviews later on down the road about your experiences in a modern Vietnam. But leading up to that, even before you set foot in the country, and to think about ITR politically, what did you know about Vietnam as you're going through the ITR process around December, January 1968? What did you know about the geopolitical aspect from your young shoes?
hardly anything. I did know, obviously, Ho Chi Minh was, pretty much the big guy in the news, and saw a lot of what he was saying that, to me, as American learning American history, a lot of what I was hearing him talk about, in terms of unifying Vietnam, I didn't know how many hundreds of years they've been trying to do that, within their own country and stuff. The main thing that I was hearing was he was educated and paid by the communists. So therefore, still out of the McCartney era, that's a bad thing. And I was trying to take what I had learned in school and through my civics classes and things of that nature and match it up with that man who was the poster child of NVA. And for me personally, I was even questioning some things early on. And it didn't affect my loyalty. It didn't affect my mindset of going on to be a good Marine. Um, as I learned later, it was above my pay grade. So I just wanted to, be able to survive, and paid attention to the things I needed to do to try to have my best chance at that. wasn't until I got to Vietnam where I learned that so much of that is just luck of the draw,
It is. And
I think.
even going through ITR. I mean, now you're learning how the Marine Corps operates at fire team, squad, platoon, company level, and you're
Right.
understanding movements, basis fire, who's going to be the assaulting element, establishing
Yeah,
flanking fires. But I know you mentioned as you went through ITR, and I've talked to a lot of different Marines that some of the weapons used in ITR training
yeah.
are always intriguing to me. So, what kind of weapons were available to you in ITR to test and to witness?
Starting right off from the get-go there, first weapon I think that was introduced to us was the M60 machine gun. And of course, this is all being done at Camp Pendleton, and you got those rolling hills and things of that nature. And for me, that was a very, everybody had the opportunity to, fire some rounds out there at a old Jeep or whatever. And the first thing that got my attention was the size of that cartridge, 50 millimeter cartridge. And then the rapid firing type situation, the little stories that went along with it about, you could chop down a tree with it, literally, that sort of thing. So that made a big impression on me. Also was the beginning to get familiar with the fact that somebody had to carry that sucker, the machine gunner. And I don't know why the Marine Corps always like these little small squatty guys to be the machine gunners. I don't know. But then somebody had to carry all that ammo. I thought I was poor me having to carry a 25 radio and a spare battery and things like that. Plus, what else I needed, my own ammunition. But, I knew for one thing that I was glad I was going to be a radio operator, not a machine gunner. I think one of the other weapons that really got our attention was I think it's 105 caliber. It's the same weapon that's mounted on the Ontos,
Oh, the 106 recoilless rifle.
106 recoilless rifle. You know, the Ontos got six of those suckers on them, and they just had one set up, like a little two-man crew. So we got to fire that, and amazing again, that it's recoilless, so very easy to use. The demonstration they used was taking a wooden crate and stick it up about 10, 12 feet behind it, and it would make toothpicks out of that crate. That was a very good learning lesson to reinforce that you don't want to be behind one of those suckers and why you had to have the commands and the clear and all that kind of good stuff. And uh, we did some more work with, learning to throw the hand grenades. A lot of education about how a hand grenade works. The firing pin, it's got a fuse, what time period you have to be able to get rid of it. I think one of the things that got my attention at the time was that you could pull the pin on the hand grenade and carry it around all day long. It wasn't until you release the spoon that it would be activated for that 5 seconds approximately. So carrying around a live hand grenade for more than 5 seconds just to get comfortable with it, that was exciting. And the from a weapon standpoint, that was about it. We got some demonstration with mortars. That again was just a whole new science. The base plate, the how do you hit a target? Like all of that was I found just from a scientific standpoint, curiosity, interesting. But all of that was just basically still kind of a more of an intro. The guys that went on to infantry training after ITR, the grunts, and they got assigned their own specialty area within that fire team and whatnot. I missed out on a lot of that. Um, and for me, it was a good experience.
Well, in many ways too, it's important, even if it's just a little taste, to get acclimated with a weapon like the M60, the C106 or M60 mortar, or dealing with a 81 millimeter mortar, simply for the fact that, especially in your role or operating with 2-1, these are going to be common sights that are carried at the squad level, or you'll see 81 millimeters at the battalion level. But you're going to see all of these different weapons at some point, and at least to have some familiarization with the sound.
Very much true. And, one of the things that we learned really quickly in Vietnam, because of the individual replacing individual, you could actually have somebody that went through school to be a cook, chef person in the military, who ended up being a machine gunner on a helicopter, because you had a person filling a slot as versus a company replacing a company. So a lot of cross training took place. I always made sure that if we were going out on any kind of little operation or anything, and I was a ready operator, I already had identified 4 or 5 or 6 guys that I had been working with, that in case somebody had to call in a medevac, because I was the medevac, I wanted them to know what they were doing, you know, and it worked the other way too. You know, if you only got one machine gunner and you're out for 3 or 4 days, and you got an assistant machine gunner and he's coming down with malaria and stuff, you need somebody else to fill stuff in for that night. So even as a ready operator, I might end up being out kind of a little forward in a overnight stay somewhere, ready to feed cartridges into his machine gun. As a ready operator, it was very, very seldom, because there's other people could do that, and they didn't want the ready operator out. Um, let's say maybe creating potential damage to the operation.
But you highlight an element of the Marine Corps, and it's even a staple in a situation like Vietnam, where you have to have that cross training. There have been several Marines that I've interviewed whose MOS was 0331, 0351, or 0311, going into some kind of infantry role, and yet they go to a different weapon. I've got assault
Yeah,
men that would just fill a gap in a squad when they got to Vietnam, because
yeah,
in many ways, as you state, that the way that the war worked is that you were filling an empty slot in a company, and you went
yeah.
where the company or the Marine Corps needed you, not necessarily where your specialty was.
That's the way it worked, and even more so in Vietnam.
And so, for you and your experience, how long did ITR last?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it was only about 3 weeks, if I remember correctly. Um, we had weekends off, so that's about the only way I could mark it. Uh, that took getting used to. Uh, we were treated like halfway decent human beings. You're past the psychological, emotional experience of boot camp. We were considered to be young Marines, and um, almost everybody there were very attentive. I mean, we had already been disciplined enough that now we had instructors in these specialty kind of areas, and paid a lot of attention. And it went very smoothly.
Were your instructors, especially at that point in your training, were all of them combat veterans of Vietnam?
Almost all of them were. As a matter of fact, I can't recall any one of them not being. And part of that was, again, the longer the war went on, like when I finished my first tour in Vietnam, I still had about almost little bit less than 2.5 years left on my enlistment. A lot of the other guys who enlisted for 2 years, and even some with 3 years, depending on what their military specialty were, they were given opportunities to take early outs, because they didn't need that many bodies back here. At that time, the law was you could not be sent back if you had been in a hostile environment, no matter where in the world, and came back stateside or whatever, you couldn't be sent back over for, I think it was a year, at least a year minimum for the Marine Corps. I think that was even longer for other branches, but so what the Marine Corps did, was just let those guys have a choice of early out. They got credit for their enlistment as far as GI Bill benefits, things of that nature. Some of them chose not to do so. And by then they'd chosen to stay in. Discovered a very interesting statistic that you might be interested in dealing with this is that a lot of people didn't realize that Marines could be drafted, or people could be drafted into the Marine Corps. The day I went into Amarillo for my processing into the military, there's about 20 of us, a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant, dressed blue pants, came in, lined us all up in 20s, and I shouldn't say us, 20 guys, draftees. There's 20 of them. He had them in 2 lines of 10. He went down and go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And he said, all the ones step forward, turn to your left, follow me through this door. You're now members of the United States Marine Corps. Imagine being drafted thinking you're going into the Army and you find out you're being drafted in the Marine Corps. Here's the interesting statistic. There's a higher percentage of Marine draftees stayed in, re-enlisted, than the ones that had volunteered. Explain that one somehow.
No kidding. That's an incredible statistic, and I'd be curious to hopefully talk to some of those Marines someday to see what encouraged them to stay in following that. Wow, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and getting through that point as well, did any of the men that you were with in 2-1 were they drafted, or would that conversation ever come up?
Never came up. And when I go to the reunions and stuff, I didn't go to any of, well, our Vietnam 2-1 organization didn't really hit the ground any kind of a capacity until much later after Vietnam. But, getting out of the Marine Corps, getting into civilian life, going to college, things of that nature. It wasn't until I don't know if I mentioned this anywhere along the line here and stuff, but I medically retired from the Veterans Administration in 2004. I had a brain aneurysm, grade 3 brain bleed, and was pretty worthless for about a year there. And it was that during that time that I heard about the Vietnam 2-1 organization. So I went to my first reunion around that time period, about 2005, 6. And then I've been to just about everyone since. So for a lot of those original guys, they were kind of together as a group for about maybe around year 2000. Organized a little bit more, that sort of thing. So when I started interacting with them, it was a relative small group of people, and the protocol was that we just kind of got together and told war stories. And the thing that I like so much about that, and we'll see if we can work out sometime or another, see if I can get you to be a guest at one of our reunions, because Vietnam was very interesting for us as combatants, because as a Vietnam veteran window is about 10 and a half years in Vietnam. So we've got men in our unit that came over by boat, landed on the beaches of Vietnam in 65. So we've got their part of the story. And then we've got other parts of the story. And then we've got this part of the story. So for me, I love going and we sit around and we find out, we know who was where, when, and the opportunity to fill in a lot of the blanks that you have, a lot of the questions that you had and stuff. That's what's really remarkable about having that little group of guys get together on such a regular basis. And of course, the more I learn, the more I want to look up, and all of what's available nowadays to be able to do the research. So not only do I know kind of about my piece, but I see how my piece fit in with a bigger whole, and how our total group fit in with a bigger whole. And it occupies a lot of the mental capacity there that is going to be different, I think, than other men, other experiences with their units and stuff.
Well, I think you highlight an excellent statement there with the understanding two ones piece of the puzzle and how it fits into a larger part of the puzzle. And that is one of the driving factors that led me to our conversation here, is that I realized that there is a unique story and an opportunity with Vietnam veterans to get their perspective of the war, of their 45-degree POV.
Mm-hmm.
And then you factor that in with someone else's point of view in the same operation. And you factor that into an overall bigger picture of the
Yeah.
operation to fully understand what
Yeah.
was going on in this time period in 1968. And as a historian yourself, it's utterly fascinating when you start connecting these dots little by little and painting together a bigger picture of an already growing bigger picture.
Yeah, very much so. And even when we go into the post Vietnam and the Vietnam Veterans Against the War group and the lifers group, and the mentality of those two different groups, how much division there was there, but also, some kind of everybody kind of recognizing there was that one common denominator, that we were all Vietnam veterans.
Well, and what eventually leads you to that point and these reunions is that in the middle of all of this is that you all end up in country together at some point, at least for your tour of duty in 1968 and 1969.
Yeah.
And thinking of that, before you wound up in Vietnam, you finish ITR and then you go to field radio operator school, correct?
Yes, sir.
And where was field radio operator school conducted for you?
I'm sorry, when?
Where? Where did
Yeah.
you go?
That was also at Camp Pendleton. And I don't remember exactly there's so many little sub camps within Camp Pendleton, but the radio school was relatively close to what we call main site. But they have enough of the rolling hills kind of a type thing there and stuff that we were able to get out into the open area to set up our antenna mast and the kind of things to go along with that. Gave us plenty of opportunity to hump over the hills, getting used to carrying the extra weight. Um, we radio operators get a pretty good class on orienteering, being able to kind of recognize where you're at on the map, military map and the terrain, things of that nature. And there's occasions that, I mentioned the hierarchy of casualties. Officers learned very rapidly in Vietnam to stop carrying their little 45s and carry M16. They didn't shave like an officer should because the enemy would look for those cues to identify who's the guy that's the one going around telling people what to do and target them. Radio operator first, officer second. Sometimes it'd be the officer first, and I might be the one that needs to call in artillery. So you get enough of that in radio school to be able to hopefully not do too much damage. Me personally, I was never put into that position, but I always had a very good idea or sense of where we were on the map, so to speak, by being the radio operator. So, especially up in Khe Sanh, the demilitarized zone on the one side and Laos on the other side, and Khe Sanh's right in that little corner up there. We were pretty close to the borders of both those areas, and of course, by rule, we were not supposed to be in Laos and not supposed to be in the DMZ. The Vietnamese were, so therefore, sometimes we got lost on the map and that sort of thing, and you don't see a lot of that in the reporting or anything of that nature because that's keep everything pure. We followed the rules. Well, yeah, but we also, got lost sometimes too.
Well, it's funny you say that. I've got a friend of mine who was a FO with artillery under the 3rd Marine Division, and I'll stop there just in case anybody tries to look into that and protect his safety. But he
Mhm.
mentions similar antics of calling in fire missions on a
Oh yeah,
grid and then shifting it a certain direction without giving too much detail to get a fire mission on a group of people in the open that by row, rules of engagement, you're not supposed to fire on, but you know exactly what they're doing.
yeah. I mean, who is going to be out there telling you slap your hand, for doing that?
Exactly.
And that opens up a whole another can of worms about, morality and ethics of war.
Well, we have
And
plenty of time to get into that, and I think this is
yeah,
going to be a fun one, and I'm excited. But for end out this last little bit for the first one, I do have a question about the Prick 25.
okay.
What what was the limitations of the Prick 25 in terrain, depending if you're moving through a valley, on top of a hill? What kind of range are we working with here?
Technically speaking, you had three different antennas, two official ones, but one of them would be the little rubber flexible brass screw in type thing that would screw these other one of two antennas into. And I mention that because a lot of people don't think of that as being an antenna, but that little nub there was used quite often by radio operators when they're out kind of like on a whoever's on a little two-man watch out around the area, listening post. They call them LPs. They'd give that guy a radio, and he would usually just transmit by handset, click, 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 because you didn't want to be out in that listening post waiting to see if anybody's getting ready to attack you. So also you didn't want to have an antenna sticking up in the air, and just that little short base served as an antenna for about a good 200 or 300 yards. Then you had a 3 foot tape antenna, is what it was called. The tape antenna was about 3 foot long, had its own little screw base to it that would screw into that flexible rubber one. And that would give you on a good day in open area, could be, up to a couple miles, if not more. And then you had your whip antenna. And as a radio operator, you always carried both of those. And when you're going in hills and areas like that, obviously, if you're up on top of a hill, you're going to do a lot better than if you're in the valley. We always hated carrying that whip antenna. It had segments about 18 inches long, and they were held together by a little kind of a flex, almost like a rubberized cord through the middle of them. And they'd pull apart and could fold up into that little bundle of about yay big around. And you could have that down in your backpack ready to go if you needed it. But we always tried to do everything we could with the tape antenna. The whip antenna is just like saying, here I am. You know, it's about 7 feet up in the air there and stuff. So that could get you, obviously more distance. At the battalion, there's that picture of me on battalion radio watch in the bunker there. We had the aluminum pole mast antennas stuck up out there. And that could give me range out much further to the companies around us. The guys up on the hills around Khe Sanh, we had good communication almost all the time. Because they did because of their elevation. I did because of having the bigger antennas. And so for the Prick 25, the main thing was those two antennas, the tape and the whip. And during the monsoons, that would affect how well they did. You always had to carry a spare battery because the battery, the electrical connections within a Prick 25 radio had about 7 or 8 different voltage requirements. So what we call the brick was the radio battery, and it went into a compartment about yay big at the bottom of the Prick 25 radio. So they had little like TV plug-in type connections all at a different voltage that would operate the radio. If any one of those broke down enough, then you didn't have radio communication because the battery's bad.
Well, and in terms of battery life, and I'm sure, of course, you learned this in the school. What's the average battery life for a Prick 25 in 1968?
Um, that depended a great deal. Like where I was at, we used the same radios in the command bunker there. So they're right there. They're used almost every day. And we would change those, depending on which radio, at which, how much it was used and everything. I had a case of 12 batteries always right there, ready to have to change the battery because we'd use them a lot. Out on the field, you could have a guy carry, I know that I was out on about a 3-day operation once, and I made it through the whole thing with just the one battery. And from what I understand from talking to the other guys, it could even last longer than that. And what was interesting was that, again, the circuits of the radio use different voltages. So it only took one of those circuits not to work that you end up having problems. The advantage of that, by the way, being a creative young man, you always had you could have about 10 volts still alive in a bad battery. And I got with the radio tech guys and figured out what the wiring was for that 10 volts. And remember, I said that the batteries came 12 to a case. I was one of the only bunkers in Vietnam that had a lamp. I took 12 bad batteries and wired them in series together and hooked them up to a pigtail, screwed a light bulb in it. And so I had electricity for a little while in my bunker to play cards with.
I
I can,
love. Go ahead. Sorry, Gary.
well, I was going to say, I can tell you that now. I'm sure it wasn't quite along the regulations at the time, but we had to destroy the batteries, even the bad ones, shoot them or whatever, burn them. We had a burn pit going almost all the time, just because they could still be used by the enemy, to detonate um, booby traps, etc. So you always had to play the little cat and mouse game with that.
Well, and it's interesting you bring up that statement, because one of my favorite questions to ask Vietnam veterans is one, of course, opinions on the NVA soldier, opinions on the Viet Cong and the situations, but also the flexibility and the adaptability of the NVA and Viet Cong and what they were able to conjure up as booby traps is one of my favorite discussions to have when we get to your journey on Vietnam. But I'm also always amazed by the ingenuity of young Marines. And I always tell my students this in the club that I run on the Vietnam War, because the kids make the jarhead jokes. They now make the crayon joke about Marines, and there are certainly jokes, but I always tell them that of the combat Marines I've spoken to, they are some of the smartest individuals I've ever had the honor of conversing with. And that is a prime example of making your own light bulb or your own lamp in your own bunker.
Well, maybe when we start talking a little bit more about what it was like up at Khe Sanh, I'll tell you about how I came up with a swamp cooler to keep the crypto gear cool.
Well, I can't wait to get to that. And Gary, I think this is going to be a phenomenal journey of your story in Vietnam. And when we pick up next week, we'll continue to pick up with your time in the radio operator school, just because I have just genuine questions about radio protocols and what you were being taught. But
Yeah.
you will find that I always end my interviews and any conversation we will ever have with Gary. Thank you for your service and sincerely welcome home.
You're very kind, sir. And, obviously I can take that differently now than I did at the time. Um, and we'll probably end up talking about that a little bit too, about, the homecoming experience, etc.
Yes, sir. I look forward to it,
And
Gary.
one of the things I'll ask you from a technical standpoint here is that, I mentioned to you, I've got my own version of the memoirs that I'm working on here that I kind of put on the shelf for a while. This all has stimulated me to get that off the shelf and try to wrap that up. But I'm at a point in that I am actually, I've come home from my first tour, the homecoming experience, some of those things and stuff. So that's kind of where I'm at. And originally was going to only write about, you know, getting into the Marine Corps in my first year there. My cousin has convinced me to keep going a little bit. And in preparing my talk for the Fifth Marine thing, I also realized the importance of maybe, I modeled my talk, as you well know, off from my last three or 3 months at Khe Sanh there. Didn't talk a lot about my experience because I was tasked with talking about the post-traumatic stress disorder and the journey from here to there. The middle part of it was the creative way of trying to come up with a way to try to help civilian people tolerate conversations about the ugliness of war. The mindset being that if this was so good for me to see the world this way, it had to be good for everybody else too. And that's why, I sometimes talk about being bilingual. I can talk normal. I was born and raised normal. I know how to speak that language, but I also know how to talk this other language. It's that other language that is so beneficial being a war trauma therapist. You can't be talking normal language dealing with abnormal experiences.
That's an excellent statement, and it's also a very honest statement.
Well, it is, and that's why I am always so attracted to young people like yourself. You know, because I already explained it to you. I'm yours to use and abuse. I have all this stuff up here, and I'm 76 years old, pretty good shape for a 76-year-old, but I'm also very much aware of the clock ticking. And a lot of this could go to waste and if it wasn't for people like yourself.
Well, Gary, thank you. It's just from my perspective, it's an honor that you're willing to talk to somebody like me who has no experience, no idea what it's like and wasn't there, but someone who just wants to get your story out on a platform to where people can learn about the perspective of a veteran in a different way and maybe have a new light and an idea and an inkling of what you went through. And hopefully, if someone ever sees you out there someday, they can just simply say, "Welcome home, Marine, and thanks for your service."
Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Gary.